By the time I had been at Stonewake Structures for a few years, I could tell what kind of day it would be by how many men mistook me for support staff before lunch. If they saw me carrying rolled plans, they asked where the conference room was. If they saw me with a laptop, they asked if I could print something. If they saw me standing quietly near the whiteboard, they assumed I was waiting to take notes. I was 28, a structural engineer, and very good at letting people embarrass themselves before I corrected them. My boss, Ron, liked to call that my calm nature. I called it data collection. The office itself was a museum of polished ego. The senior engineers spoke in a tone normally reserved for trial judges and men explaining grills. Dean from Steel Design never said my name unless he needed a spreadsheet fixed. Vic, who had been at the firm only a year longer than me, kept introducing me to clients as if I were part of operations. Operations. As if I had earned a degree to alphabetize binders. Then, Crownwell Health came in with a new regional hospital project, and the entire office changed shape like wet cement settling in a mold. It was the kind of job people attached future titles to. Project lead, associate, director track, bigger bonus pool, bigger office. Suddenly, every man who had ignored me for years was hovering near Ron like he was holding life rafts. Ron called 6 of us into the glass room sometime in the early morning. He spread out the initial brief and tapped the site survey. Fast-paced, high visibility, seismic requirements, long-span surgery wing, future expansion capacity, he said. Whoever solves the structural concept best will have a strong case for promotion when we reorganize. The room went still. Not silent. Still. That was the difference between people listening and people calculating. Dean leaned back and smiled like the promotion was already monogrammed. Vic cracked his knuckles. Milo, one of the quieter engineers, started underlining load paths in the brief. I kept reading the client notes. Hospitals are not vanity projects. They are liability machines with fluorescent lighting. Every column location affects workflow. Every vibration issue matters. Every shortcut grows teeth later. That was what thrilled me. In college, I had spent years writing papers about force transfer, redundancy, lateral stability, constructability. I had fed grand ideas into documents and watched them die in binders. Here, I could make the idea stand up in the world. Here, equations became floors people trusted with their bodies. Ron looked at me last. Liv, thoughts? I knew half the room expected me to say something tidy and administrative. Instead, I pointed at the imaging wing and said, if we overbuild around the diagnostic floors without planning future equipment loads, Crownwell will pay twice. Once now, once during retrofit. Also, if we do not coordinate early with mechanical routing, half the heroic ideas in this room will become expensive comedy. Milo coughed to hide a laugh. Dean frowned. Ron nodded. Good. Work up concepts. Presentation in a few days. When we filed out, Vic caught up with me near the printers. You really think Ron wants a lecture on retrofit cost? I think Crownwell wants a building that works. He gave me a smile that had no warmth in it. You are intense. And you are underprepared. His eyes narrowed just enough to be satisfying. The next few days were a blur of calculations, red lines, model checks, and more takeout containers than any human should admit to. I barely noticed the office chatter until it started circling me. Dean would stroll by my desk and say things like, still grinding away, Liv? Need me to explain long span framing? Vic was worse because he was subtler. He asked leading questions in front of others. So, are you helping Ron package the presentations? No, I said. I am building one. He laughed as if I had made a charming little joke. That alone might have annoyed me. And what sharpened it into purpose was what I overheard near the sample library one afternoon. Dean said, if Ron wants leadership presence, it is not going to be the quiet girl. Vic answered, she does good math. Promotion is not one on math. I stepped around the corner, looked at both of them, and said, that is a brave theory in a structural engineering firm. Milo choked on his water. Neither man replied. That was when I decided I was done waiting for respect to arrive on its own polished shoes. If they wanted a contest, I would give them one. Not loud, not messy, just precise, like a load calculation. And I had already started keeping records. Every design assumption, every marked up sketch, every email where someone dismissed a risk I flagged, every timestamp on my model revisions. Men who confuse confidence with competence often forget that paper trails are sturdier than swagger. Hospitals do not forgive vanity, neither do I. I love the stage in a design problem when it still looks impossible to everyone else. That is where the best work hides. By the second day, Stonewake had turned into a parade of male peacocks in rolled sleeves. Dean was pitching heavy transfer girders as if steel tonnage were a personality trait. Vic kept talking about visual drama, which is a worrying phrase in a hospital structure. Milo focused on efficiency and said very little, which made him more useful than half the room combined. I built my scheme the way I always do, from the bones out. I started with the surgery wing, because sensitive spaces punish vibration and foolishness equally. Then I worked through load paths, knee expansion flexibility, mechanical coordination, phased construction, and future imaging upgrades. I gave Crownwell options without giving them chaos. I trimmed anything that looked flashy but would cost them more in claims, delays, or ugly change orders. That was one of the lessons no one teaches women early enough. Good work is not enough. You also have to frame the business value of good work in language power respects. Not prettier, clearer. A hospital client does not care that an engineer had an elegant week. They care that the roof behaves, the floors stay quiet, the contractor does not file 10 angry notices, and the budget survives contact with reality. Sometime in the late afternoon, Vic drifted over to my desk with a coffee and that lazy grin he wore when he thought he was being strategic. You are still on the same model? I am on the improved version of the same model. He set his cup down on an empty corner of my desk without asking. Ron wants leaders. You know that, right? I assume leadership will be tested through engineering on an engineering project. He laughed. That is cute. No, leadership is presentation, confidence, owning the room. I kept typing. Then I hope the room has load-bearing walls. He did not like that. He leaned closer to my monitor. You should make the pitch simpler. Clients do not follow technical women when they get too deep. I turned in my chair and met his eyes. Did that sentence sound intelligent in your head? He straightened, smiling now with his teeth. You are touchy this week. No, I am observant every week. He took his coffee and walked off. I opened a new note and documented the exchange. Date, context, exact phrasing. That habit came from my mother, a real estate paralegal who believed women should leave receipts the way good builders leave rebar schedules. She used to say that memory is emotional, records are contractual. Men count on women being too tired, too embarrassed, or too busy to write things down. I was not any of those things. Later, Ron stopped by with fresh comments from Crownwell. They wanted stronger disaster resilience messaging and cleaner phasing options for future expansion. I had already built both into my concept. Ron scanned my screen. You are ahead. I read the client packet. He gave me a look that almost became a smile. Present that way. Around the office, the promotion fever was getting ridiculous. Dean had started name-dropping upper management within earshot of anyone breathing. Vic kept practicing his pitch in the conference room glass reflection, like he was auditioning to sell luxury sedans. A junior engineer asked me who I thought would win, with the tone people use around horse races. I said, the person who solves the problem? He blinked. No, I mean politically. I saved my file. Then the person smart enough to solve the problem and prove it. That evening, Milo lingered near my desk while everyone else peeled off. You know, Vic asked me if you needed help formatting your slides. I looked up. How generous of him. He said clients can get lost when you talk. I shut my laptop slowly. And what did you say? Milo grinned. I said I have never seen a client lost with you. I have seen men lost with you. Different issue. I laughed so hard I nearly forgave the week. Then Milo grew serious. Liv, he is going to try to get ahead of you in the meeting. I know. You sound very calm about that. I am. A person can cut in line. A person cannot fake engineering under questions. That was the delicious truth sitting under all the noise. Promotion theater only works until details enter the room. And details were my native language. Before I left, I backed up every model file, exported my revision history, and emailed myself a summary of design assumptions. Not because I expected disaster, because women who expect credit without documentation often end up giving unpaid masterclasses in disappointment. I did not plan to be disappointed. I planned to be undeniable. And if a few men happened to walk themselves into public humiliation along the way, I was not going to interrupt. Presentation day arrived with the kind of office energy usually reserved for layoffs and fire alarms. Everyone was dressed 1 degree sharper than necessary. Ties tightened, voices lowered. Ambition sprayed over the room like cheap cologne. Ron had scheduled the internal review before the Crownwell call. The firm leadership would choose which concept moved forward and who would front the client presentation. In plain language, this was the gateway to promotion. I took my seat along the side wall with my laptop closed and my notes in order. I had learned not to announce readiness. Let everyone else confuse volume with weight. Vic was pacing near the screen. That should have warned us all. Ron opened the meeting. We will go in order. Keep it concise. Crownwell wants technical strength, cost awareness, and long-term flexibility. Dean went first. His concept was expensive, overbuilt, and delivered with the confidence of a man who had never met a budget he could not ignore. Leadership pushed back immediately on tonnage, constructability, and mechanical conflicts. He tried to charm his way through it. Charm is a fragile beam. Then Ron said, Vic. Vic stood as if history had personally invited him. He clicked to his title slide and gave the room a grin. What he presented over the next several minutes was a strange mix of swagger, vague architectural flattery, and structural optimism bordering on fiction. His framing ignored the future expansion sequence. His lateral system clashed with core planning. His spans looked elegant until anyone thought about actual serviceability. He had one slide full of render-style arrows and phrases like streamlined patient flow, which would have been wonderful if arrows could hold up surgical floors. I watched the leadership faces change one by one. Interest, concern. Then that special expression people get when they realize a confident person has brought a water pistol to a storm. Ron interrupted. Where is the vibration analysis? Vic clicked twice, then once more. That is under refinement. The operations director asked, how would the contractor phase this without major disruption to the future wing tie-in? Vic answered with several words that never became an answer. Then the managing principal, Ruth, leaned forward. Ruth was the kind of woman who could make nonsense collapse from 20 feet away. Why, she asked very softly, does this plan assume ideal coordination across systems you have not even accommodated? Silence. Vic tried to recover. The concept is meant to be directional. Ruth did not blink. It is directionally expensive and structurally thin. That landed hard. Someone near the back coughed into a fist. No one looked at Vic. Which was worse? He clicked to his last slide too quickly, muttered something about next steps, and sat down with his ears red enough to guide ships. Public humiliation is ugly when it is deserved. It is uglier when the person caused it with a full tank of arrogance. I did not enjoy it exactly. I just thought it had excellent educational value. Ron looked at me. Live. For one clean second, nerves swept through me. Not fear, voltage. I had worked too hard not to feel the size of the moment. Then I stood, opened my laptop, and walked to the screen. On the way up, I caught Dean staring at me with the expression men get when their assumptions file for bankruptcy. I began simply. I designed for what Crownwell actually asked for. A stable hospital that performs now, adapts later, and does not become a lawsuit with elevators. A few people smiled. Ruth did. Then I took them through the system. Clear span strategy where it mattered, vibration control for sensitive floors, a lateral approach aligned with planning reality. mechanical routing coordination points, future expansion logic, material efficiency, contractor sequencing, risk reduction, cost implications tied to each decision, no grandstanding, no fluff. No apology for knowing exactly what I was doing. Halfway through, Ron stopped taking notes and just listened. Milo had both elbows on the table. Dean was no longer pretending boredom. Vic stared at the table as if wood grain could save him. Then came questions. I love questions. Questions are where pretty men with polished voices go to die. Ruth asked about redundancy. I answered. Operations asked about change order exposure. I answered. Finance asked about long-term cost positioning. I answered that smart design upfront is cheaper than funding structural regret through retrofit and claims, and that hospital owners remember which consultants protect them from avoidable risk. Ruth looked around the room and said, "This is the one." Just like that. Not because I was lucky, not because anyone gave me a moment out of kindness, Ian, because I had done the work and framed it so no one could misunderstand its value. When I sat down, the room was different. No one asked me to print anything. Respect arrived at Stonewake in a form I deeply mistrust. It was suddenly very polite. Men who had ignored me for years started using my full title. Dean asked whether I wanted coffee. Someone from upper management stopped by my desk to say excellent work with the careful tone people use after discovering they have underestimated a person with a memory. Vic did not speak to me until the next day. He found me near the markups room, where I was reviewing comments from Crownwell after our concept had been approved for refinement. He stood with one hand in his pocket, practicing casual. "You did well," he said. "Thank you." He shifted. I think Ron may have misunderstood how much informal collaboration went into all this. I looked up slowly. "What exactly are you saying?" He gave a shrug polished to look harmless. "Just that we all talked through ideas. It would be a shame if leadership thought this was a solo effort." There it was. Not apology, not grace, an attempted theft wrapped in team language. I closed the markup set. "Did you contribute to my design?" "We discussed project priorities." "No, we occupied the same oxygen. Did you contribute to my design?" His jaw tightened. "That is not how promotions work, Liv. Visibility matters. People want leaders who share credit. People also want leaders who can distinguish between collaboration and opportunism." He lowered his voice. "You do not want to get a reputation for being difficult." That nearly made me laugh. Women in male-dominated offices are always one boundary away from being called difficult. I had stopped treating that as a threat. It was usually a sign I had reached the truth. I said, "I keep detailed records, Vic. Model history, revision logs, design notes, email threads. If you would like to discuss authorship in front of leadership, I am fully prepared." He stared at me. I gave him a pleasant smile. "Please choose the version of this conversation that benefits your career." He walked away without another word. That was the revenge no one sees coming from a quiet woman. Not screaming, not sabotage, not some dramatic hallway speech. Just clean evidence and better judgment. Men who gamble on ambiguity hate women who archive. The real test came later that week in a promotion review session with Ron and Ruth. And I expected technical discussion. I got something better. Ruth folded her hands. "Your concept is moving forward, and your performance has been noticed. Tell us why you should lead the structural side under Ron." There are moments when women are trained to soften, to smile modestly, to hope someone else states the case for them. I had bills, ambition, and a very low tolerance for self-erasure. "I should lead it," I said, "because I solved the core problem, documented the business case clearly, and earned client confidence under pressure. Also because hospital work is not just calculations. It is liability management, coordination discipline, and protecting the firm from expensive mistakes. I do all three." Ron nodded once. Ruth said, "And compensation?" That made me like her even more. Too many women accept title inflation as if praise were legal tender. I had already prepared my answer. If responsibility increases, compensation needs to reflect billable value, client-facing leadership, and risk exposure. I am not interested in a decorative promotion. Ron actually smiled at that. Ruth asked a few more questions. About staffing. About consultant coordination. About how I handle resistance in teams where senior men are not used to taking direction from younger women. I said, I do not fight for emotional victory. I establish standards, document decisions, and keep the work moving. Eventually, performance settles the argument. When the meeting ended, Ruth stood and said, Good. Keep doing exactly that. Word traveled fast. By the next morning, everyone knew I had been named Project Structural Lead under Ron, with an associate track review tied to project milestones. Not a shiny promise. Real criteria. Real leverage. Real money on the table if I delivered. Dean congratulated me like it physically pained him. Milo brought me a muffin and said, The empire trembles. Vic kept his distance. I did not gloat. Not outwardly. But when he had to ask me to approve a coordination package later that afternoon, I admit I enjoyed the pause before I answered. Leave it there, I said. I will review it when I finish actual engineering. Witty? Maybe a little? Petty? Only in the healthiest possible measure. The sweetest part was not watching them squirm. It was watching them adjust. By the time Crownwell moved into detailed design, the office had settled into a new rhythm, and that rhythm sounded a lot like men learning my name properly. Liv, do you want to review the transfer sequence? Liv, the client had a question about expansion joints. Liv, can you weigh in before we issue this? It was amazing what a public victory and a documented chain of competence could do for workplace manners. The interactions changed in ways small and large. Dean stopped interrupting me in coordination meetings after I corrected his load assumption in front of the mechanical team with enough courtesy to make it sting. Milo became my unofficial ally and chief observer of male behavior, which meant I got a running stream of dry commentary. One afternoon, after Vic stumbled through an explanation to the contractor rep and I cleaned it up in 3 sentences, Milo leaned toward me and whispered, Watching him discover you are not temporary has been excellent for morale. I nearly laughed in the middle of the meeting. Even Ron changed. He started asking for my read before speaking in strategy sessions. He copied me directly on client decisions instead of routing everything through older men by habit. That may sound minor to someone outside the industry. It is not. Access is power. Visibility is leverage. Being in the documented decision chain is how women stop being optional. That became my private rule for every younger woman who joined after me. Get your work in writing, track scope, confirm decisions by email, know who holds signature authority, know what liability sits behind a rushed approval. Never confuse friendliness with protection, and never do leadership work on a support title. Stonewake hired a new graduate named June not long after the project gained speed. On her second day, someone mistook her for admin near reception. She found me later and looked half annoyed, half embarrassed. Does that happen a lot here? I handed her a red pen. Less than it used to. Also, never carry someone else planning notes into a room unless your name is already on the agenda. People assign roles very quickly. She blinked. That is oddly specific. It is called preventive engineering. She grinned. That was the part I had not expected to enjoy so much. Not just winning, reshaping the room so the next woman did not have to spend years proving she belonged near a whiteboard. As for Vic, his revenge was wonderfully ordinary. He had to keep working in the reality he had created. He had tried to outrun substance with posture, and now every meeting exposed the gap. No one mocked him openly. That would have been too easy. They simply trusted him less. In engineering, that is a social death with spreadsheets. One evening, sometime after another long review session, I stood by the conference room glass and looked at the hospital model on screen. The frame lines were clean. The load paths made sense. The future expansion strategy still held. Somewhere down the road, people I would never meet would walk those corridors without thinking about the skeleton beneath them. I liked that. I liked it even more, knowing I had fought to put my own name where it belonged. Ron stepped beside me. You know, he said, I did not realize how much this office underestimated you. I kept my eyes on the model. I realized. He nodded, wincing a little. Fair. Then he added, You changed the temperature around here. That was one way to put it. Another was this. I stopped asking to be seen and started making invisibility expensive. When I finally packed up to leave, June called from her desk. See you tomorrow, Liv. Tomorrow, I said. I walked past the reception area, past the conference rooms, past the men who once asked me where the printer paper was, and I smiled to myself. They had wanted a promotion contest. They got one. And the quiet girl they thought was the secretary turned out to be the engineer who knew exactly how to build a structure, protect a client, secure her leverage, and let bad men collapse under their own design. That was not luck. That was math.